Are you ready for an epic battle between two processors? Well, so was I. But unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be as epic as I thought it was going to be. But we're going to get to all that, so make sure you stay tuned. Today's going to be an exciting video, guys. We are going to be comparing the Emotiva XMC-2 to the Anthem AVM70 processor. I'm Barrett, this is Spec of Tech, welcome to the channel. For those of you that are familiar with the channel, you know that I try to give my honest opinion. Well, get ready for a heavy dose of honesty. This comparison may get just a little bit ugly. About 7 months ago, I switched from the Marantz AV7706 to the Anthem AVM70, and I made that switch because I did find that the AVM70 did have a step up in the sound quality department. I'll link that video in the top right hand corner and down in the description for those that want to check that out. But my friend Lucas that I met through the Canadian Audio and Home Theater group recently got the Emotiva XMC-2, and as fate would have it, he recently moved, so he wasn't going to be using it for the next couple of months, so he was generous enough to lend it to me so that I could compare it to the Anthem AVM70. So a huge thank you to Lucas for helping make this happen. So in today's video, we will be comparing the setup of the two units, as well as the build quality and aesthetics, the functionality and user interface, connectivity, the video, and of course the sound quality of the two units. And yes, there will be sound demos between the two later on in the video, so make sure you stay tuned. So we do have a lot to cover in this video today, and I do want to give you guys as much information as I can, but in the interest of time, I will not be comparing all of the internal specs. Those can easily be found online. All right, so let's get right into it, starting with the setup. So maybe it is just my bad luck, but I did actually have some issues on the setup for both of these units, so let's talk about it. So in my video about the Anthem, I did have some initial setup issues, but most of that was my fault because I didn't take a look at the quick start guide, which did explain how to connect the unit to Wi-Fi. I thought it would be something simple that I could just go into the menu and connect, but that wasn't the case. There was a little something that you needed to know, which was that you connect it through Google Home. So I won't go into full detail because I did cover it in the video, which is linked in the top right hand corner, as well as down in the description below. The other issue that I faced was that ARC, or Anthem Room Correction, was not working at the time of release. They did get it working about 2.5 weeks later though. Besides those two main issues, there was a couple other smaller bugs that they did fix pretty quickly. One of them was when you were switching between HDMIs, sometimes you wouldn't get sound for quite some time, or you wouldn't at all, so you'd have to switch to a different input and then back to that one, and then you'd get sound. The other issue was that the OSD, or on-screen display, wasn't working fully when they released the unit, but in about 2 or 3 days they had that one fixed. So the good thing was they fixed these issues pretty quickly. The bad thing was it should have never been released with those issues in the first place. So to sum it up, the Anthem setup did have some initial issues, but they did get them fixed fairly quickly. And other than that, setting up your distances, levels, and all that are very quick on the intuitive web UI. So let's move on to the Emotiva setup. So the first thing I did, of course, is unbox the Emotiva and put it in my rack and connect all of the inputs and outputs. But once you've done that, if you do want to use the Dirac room correction software, you do have to connect 2 separate devices to the unit. So the 2 devices are a network switch as well as a Raspberry Pi, which they use as the Dirac interface box. You have to connect the Raspberry Pi to the network switch with an Ethernet cable, and then you have to connect an Ethernet cable from the network switch to the unit itself, and then another Ethernet cable from the network switch to your modem or router. Once you have that all connected, then both the Raspberry Pi and the network switch have their own power cable, so then you would have to plug those in as well. For those that are curious, it is my understanding that the XMC-2 and Dirac speak 2 different codes, so the Raspberry Pi and the network switch help them talk to each other. So the next thing that I wanted to do was make sure that it was running the latest firmware, just to make sure that the comparison was going to be fair. So I checked the firmware and it was running 2.2, and I realized that 2.3 was online. You would think you'd be able to update it automatically through the network connection that you just made with the Raspberry Pi and the network switch, but that is not the case. What you have to do is download the update on a USB stick, put the USB stick into the front of the XMC-2, turn the XMC-2 on, it'll realize that there's an updated firmware on there, and then it'll handle the rest from there. And it took about 5 to 10 minutes for that to complete. After the update, I did put the unit into standby mode and then turned it back on, just to make sure that everything went smooth. Okay, so at this point, you're almost ready to start enjoying the XMC-2, but first I wanted to set up the distances and the levels for all my speakers. Because I'm used to the Anthem and the web UI, doing this through the Emotiva XMC-2 was a little bit more cumbersome than what I'm used to, because I did have to go into the menu, and you can either use the front display of the unit or the on-screen display through your TV or projector, so I chose to do it through my TV. So you just end up using the remote and the on-screen display to scroll through the menu and make the changes you want to make. It isn't incredibly slow, but it is a little bit slower than what I'm used to. The on-screen display with the Anthem is quite a bit quicker. One of the issues that I ran into when setting the levels was that the tone generator in the XMC-2 has 3 different levels, so it has low, medium, and high. And I wasn't sure which one to use to get the appropriate 75 dB at reference at the main listening position, so I just decided to use the low setting. So then I brought out the U mic and RU, and I set all of the levels to 75 dB at my main listening position using the tone generation from the XMC-2 at the low setting. So then I decided to play a song through Amazon Music HD, which is my streaming service of choice, because they have millions of Ultra HD songs that play at 192 kilohertz and 3,730 kilobits a second. For those that may be interested in checking that out, I dropped a link down in the description. So I turned the volume down to negative 30 dB on the XMC-2 and then hit play on my song. And guys, this scared the living crap out of me. The volume was so insanely loud, I'm talking above reference, that it literally made me jump. I had to quickly hit pause because I didn't want to damage anything. But for some reason, the signal was incredibly hot. So what I did is I put the unit back into standby, turned it back on, and then turned the volume down to negative 60 dB, which was a little bit more tolerable, but at the same time I could hear that there was crackling in the speakers, so there was obviously a clipping signal going on there. So after hours of trying to set my levels, and I did try the other levels of tone generation, like I stated earlier, there's low, medium, and high. I did have a phone conversation with Lucas, and after about an hour on the phone, I did show him that the signal was crackling. We figured out that the unit needed to be powered down and then unplugged and then plugged back in, and that seemed to get the unit working a little bit better. Before we did that, I actually did try running Dirac as well, and when I adjusted the levels within Dirac, I was still getting a crackling sound using the tone generation within the Dirac software, so that it was still an issue even after we unplugged it as well. And another thing that I want to point out with Dirac, because it is kind of part of the setup, running the room calibration, is when I was adjusting my levels, all of the videos I watched and the manual that I read said that you are trying to adjust your levels until it turned green. Well, none of my levels would turn green. They were just a dark blue line. Eventually, Lucas and I did also figure out that the adjustment levels no longer turn green. They just stay blue. But it was confusing at first, trying to run the software with outdated information. So there were some other issues that I ran into with the Dirac software, but we'll get into that later on in the video. But for now, which one did I prefer regarding the setup aspect of these two units? Well, I think it's pretty clear at this point that I did prefer the Anthem. Yes, it did have some initial issues. One of the issues was actually my own fault for not reading the quick start guide, but now it is a pretty smooth running unit, or shortly after it was released was a fairly smooth running unit. Whereas the Emotiva, I can't say the same. I did have a lot of struggles getting things set up and getting things to sound at least to a workable level. And with the Emotiva requiring 2 separate boxes to be hooked up to run the Dirac software, yes, you could just unhook those when you're done running Dirac, but it is just an added step and more to know when setting up the Emotiva XMC-2. But with all those things in mind, the XMC-2 was more work for me to try and get it set up. But let's move on to the build quality and the aesthetics. So of course, when discussing build quality and aesthetics, this is subjective, so everybody's going to feel differently, so all I can do is tell you guys how I feel. But there are 2 distinct looks here between the XMC-2 and the AVM70. The build quality is well done on both units. They both feel robust with their all-metal builds. So both the XMC-2 and the AVM70 say they are 22 pounds online, but I have held them both, one in each hand, and I would say that the Emotiva is quite a bit lighter. I didn't have an appropriate scale to weigh it, but I would say that the Emotiva is not 22 pounds, or the AVM70 is heavier than 22 pounds. Both units are 17 inches wide and are close in height, but please do keep in mind that the XMC-2 is 1 inch deeper, so for me and my rack, I did actually have to have it sticking out a little bit, just so that the back doors of my rack were not putting too much pressure on the cables on the back of the unit. So which one do I prefer? Well, personally, I do prefer the look of the Anthem AVM70. It has a simplistic yet modern look that just blends very well with the rest of my equipment in my rack. For me personally, I do feel that the Anthem does belong in 2021 a little more so than the Emotiva. That's not to say that the Emotiva looks bad or it looks old in any way, shape, or form. I just feel that the Anthem does look a little bit more modern in my opinion. As you can see in these pictures, the XMC-2 is still a slick looking piece of gear. I just feel that it's a little bit more outdated with its blue OLED display. But with that being said, regarding looks, I would gladly have either one of these units in my AV rack. But real quick before we move on to connectivity, I would really appreciate it if you guys would stay connected with me by subscribing and tick the bell icon if you do. I'm getting awfully close to 10,000 subscribers, so it would be awesome if you would help me get there. And please take just 1 second out of your day to hit that like button. I truly do appreciate it. So both of these units do have quite a bit of I/O, but there are some minor differences as well as a couple of big ones. Some of the minor differences are as follows. The Anthem offers 1 extra XLR, which doesn't sound like much, but this also allows you to have 2 subwoofers and 3 sets of height channels connected. The Emotiva, for example, does allow you to have 3 sets of height channels, but you would need to use 2 of the subwoofer outputs, leaving you only 1 for the subwoofer. Or you can have 3 subwoofers, but then only 2 sets of heights. It really would be up to you which one you prefer, because everybody has different setups and would need different variations of XLRs. The XMC-2 does have 1 extra trigger, making 4. It also has XLR analog inputs and 1 XLR input for AES. The AVM70 does not have this, but it does have an RS-232 port, which the XMC-2 does not. The AVM70 has 3 HDMI outs and 7 inputs. The XMC-2 has 8 inputs and 2 outputs. So as you can see with a lot of the ports, you're just swapping one port for another. There's not a lot of huge differences, but there is 2 main differences that I'd like to point out here, and one of them is wireless connectivity. The Anthem does include Chromecast and Bluetooth wireless connectivity, but the Emotiva opted for no wireless connectivity at all. Or one of the biggest differences here is that the Anthem AVM70 does have RCA pre-outs for hooking up amplifiers with RCA cables, and the Emotiva does not have any. You can only hook up amplifiers with an XLR cable. So is there a clear winner when it comes to connectivity? Well, it's difficult to say because everybody needs different connections. For me personally, I do use wireless connectivity, so the Anthem having Bluetooth and Chromecast does edge out a win for me. But you know what does have a clear winner? Is the functionality and user interface. So let's talk about it. So real quick before we talk about functionality and user interface is I wanted to point out that I had no preference coming into this comparison. I had no brand loyalty. For me personally, I'm all about what sounds better and what works better. So this is not me picking on one and not the other. This is simply me telling you guys about my experience. So please do keep that in mind when I'm discussing this next topic. And I also do understand that there is always going to be a learning curve with a new processor or a new piece of gear, but I feel that what I went through here is well beyond a learning curve. All right, so let's start with some of the basics here, like the boot up time. So the boot up time on the Anthem is actually really quick, regardless if the unit was unplugged and just plugged in, or if it was placed in standby and turned on. It is very quick regardless of the situation. I can't say the same for the Emotiva. When the unit has been powered down and unplugged and you plug it back in, it does take a couple of minutes for the initial boot up. But in contrast, after it's had that initial boot up and you place it in standby and power it on, it is very quick to turn on as well. When conducting software updates, the Anthem will do this with its network connection, and it can even be set to do it automatically, which is pretty convenient. With the XMC-2, like I said earlier, you do have to download it to a USB stick and then plug that into the front of the unit, and then the unit will take care of the rest from there, so not quite as convenient than having it automatically done through a network connection. When it comes to the front displays of the units, they kind of went in 2 different directions here. The Emotiva went with an all-blue OLED screen, which actually does offer you quite a bit of information, but unfortunately the lettering is too small for me personally to read it in my AV rack. But the saving grace here is that it does have an info button on the remote, which gives you some pretty useful information on your TV or projector screen. I already alluded earlier that I do prefer the AVM70 screen because it is an all-color display, but I also feel that they missed out on an opportunity for 1, to make it bigger, and 2, to provide you with a lot more large information. So the XMC-2 does show more information on the front display than the AVM70, but I am able to read the information on the AVM70 versus the XMC-2. In my opinion, the best of both worlds would be to make the AVM70 screen larger, and it would display all the information that's displayed on the XMC-2. When it comes to accessing the settings, on the Emotiva you can access it through the on-screen display, from here forward referred to as the OSD, or you can access it on the front display of the unit. With the AVM70, you can access the settings through the front display as well as through the OSD, but in addition to that, you can get access to the settings through a very intuitive web UI, which you can access through any device that has a web browser. And guys, I do have to admit that the front display as well as the OSD is more responsive on the Anthem than it is on the Emotiva. Not that the Emotiva is incredibly slow, but it is definitely slower and noticeable. All right, so now that we've covered some of the basics, unfortunately, here's where it takes a turn for the worse for the Emotiva. So as I mentioned during the setup, I did have some initial sound issues. So this did take several hours to get sorted out, but as I said, the end result was that we had to unplug the unit, plug it back in, and that resolved some of the issues, but unfortunately not all of them. Some of the other issues I ran into were slow input changes as well as slow setting changes. So this next one's a little bit hard to explain, but when you're in the settings menu on the OSD, every time you click the up button or the down button, the whole menu has to refresh, and then it puts you either one down or one up depending on what you pressed. Well, in some circumstances when I did that, I would actually end up with 2 menu options that are labeled exactly the same. So let's say I went down one because I was trying to get to that menu option, it would be written the same as the one above it. So then I'd either have to press down or up again, and then it would move me, but then the writing would be correct in that menu option. So I hope that makes sense, but it's not a huge deal, but I did want to point that out, that it's something I encountered. Another issue I had is when the XMC-2 was on and on HDMI 2, which is for my NVIDIA Shield, and then I would turn the NVIDIA Shield on after the Emotiva was turned on, then I wouldn't get any sound. So what I'd have to do is I'd have to change the input to either HDMI 3 or HDMI 1, and then back to HDMI 2, and then I would get my sound. This next issue is kind of along the same lines, I think, as the previous one. So when using the NVIDIA Shield and I would turn it on, I would get sound, but there would be some crackles and there would be some weird sounds. So I'd have to change the input and change it back, and then it would be normal again. Another issue I ran into is after running the Dirac software, the volume indicated on the unit itself as well as on the OSD with ending with a 0.5. So as I'd go up in volume, it would say be 22.5 to 23.5, 24.5, and so on. So to fix that, what I had to do is either turn it all the way up or all the way down, which the volume would then end in a 0, and then from there on forward, it would go up by 1 dB, but ending in a 0. So after running Dirac the first time, I had channels that were hotter than others, and it was very noticeable. So I thought maybe it was because I set the levels and distances before running Dirac. So what I did is I factory reset the unit, and then I went back in, and all I changed was which speakers I would be running. I did not set levels, I did not set distances, and then I ran Dirac for a second time. I took the advice of Lucas as well as some other Emotiva owners, and I powered the unit down, unplugged it, and plugged it back in after I ran Dirac for the second time. So after running Dirac the second time, two of the issues that I faced was that my right subwoofer was actually 15 dB hotter than my left, and I confirmed that using RU as well as my U mic, and for some reason I lost my center imaging. The right speaker was more dominant than the left, so anytime I was listening to 2-channel, it sounded like most of the music was coming from the right-hand side. So I went into the Emotiva settings and I level matched the right subwoofer with the left, but I found out that the right speaker was already level matched with the left speaker. So I'm not sure why I was experiencing that very dominant right side sound, something to do with Dirac, but it had nothing to do with the levels. With all these issues that I faced, I would have liked to have just crossed this off as a faulty unit, but Lucas did assure me that he had everything working fine when he had the unit hooked up at his place. So I'd also like to cross it off as user error, but I did walk through the setup with Lucas and he saw that I was doing it just fine. There was nothing wrong with how I was doing it. So possibly this could be just the firmware that I updated to. Like I said, when I got it, it was on 2.2 and I updated it to 2.3. So it's possible that the firmware here is what the issue is, but it's hard for me to say. So regardless of what we want to think, whether it's user error, whether it's bugs, or whether it was the firmware update, I think that's all beside the point. Really, you should not be experiencing these type of issues with a processor of this caliber. I actually did ask some other Emotiva owners about some of the issues, and kind of what I got back was tricks of the trade. For instance, having to unplug the unit, plug it back in, and then it would run smoother. Or I was also told that Dirac sometimes doesn't get the levels 100% correct, so you have to go in and fix them, which I just don't think is something you should have to do. So I don't want to be overly harsh on the Emotiva here. Like I said, I really did want to love it. I was hoping it would be a step up from the AVM70 and something I could upgrade to, but I just don't feel that at this point in the game I should be experiencing these type of issues. This unit has been on the market for a while now and it should have all been sorted out. So with all that said, I'm not ignoring the fact that the AVM70 did have some bugs on the initial release as well. One of the big ones being that ARC wasn't working, but like I said, they did fix them fairly quickly. One of the issues was even my fault. So which one did I prefer here? Well, I think it's again clear to see that I did prefer the AVM70. The Emotiva just needs a little bit of work in this category. Alright, so let's cover the video aspect of the two processors. There isn't much to cover here, so it's going to be pretty quick. So both units do come with HDMI 2.0, and they support HDR as well as Dolby Vision, but Anthem goes one step further and includes IMAX Enhanced, which the XMC-2 does not include. Both of these units support the full bandwidth of HDMI 2.0 of 18.2 kilobits a second. They also support Chroma 444 as well as HDCP 2.2. You will get stunning images with both. Video is mostly just passed through without any unnecessary processing, so essentially they should look identical. Let's move on to a category where the XMC-2 redeems itself a little, and that's the sound quality. Make sure you stick around because we will be doing some sound demo comparisons as well. So let me start off by saying that I'm not going to be showing you how to run ARC here. I've already done a video on that, which I'll link in the top right hand corner as well as down in the description below. I will also not be showing you how to run Dirac. There's actually some great YouTubers that have already done this. Spare Change, I believe, did it with the actual XMC-2, and Youthman has done it with the Monolith HTP-1, but essentially running Dirac is the same on both those units, so feel free to check out their their videos. Another thing that I will not be covering is the sound quality of the XMC-2 with Dirac, because I was never able to get it to a point where it would be fair to do so. Like I said, I was having issues, so I didn't think it would be fair to compare it to ARC, which is currently working on the Anthem AVM70. Alright, so once I had set the levels and the distances on the XMC-2, after the restart and everything was working properly without Dirac enabled, it sounded fantastic. I mean, it sounded really good. There was incredible clarity and channel separation. I'd watched the Ready Player One race scene demo, and I was greeted with just impressive immersion and crystal clear effects. You know the part where King Kong's running at the top of the buildings, kind of behind but to the left of the DeLorean? Well, I could hear his grunts and all the building crumbling right behind me. The channel separation was just fantastic. Another thing I want to point out here is that the highs are still very clear, but I do find it to be slightly tamer than that of the AVM70. I also want to point out that the height effects of the XMC-2 again did seem to be ever so slightly just a little bit clearer than the Anthem AVM70. It's not a huge or monumental difference. The only time that you would really recognize there's a difference is if you had the opportunity like me to compare them side by side. So there is a slight difference there, I would say, but it's not very noticeable. When discussing bass with the XMC-2, it's very clean, it's very powerful, and I'd have to say that there is actually a little bit more of it than the AVM70. When listening to music with the XMC-2, it's just incredibly enjoyable, very reminiscent of the AVM70 here. The center image is just locked on, and it's got a very wide soundstage. So when talking about the AVM70, of course you have great clarity and channel separation as well. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons that I chose the AVM70 over my previous Marantz AV7706. But I just feel that the XMC-2 does add just a little bit in that category. Those that know me or know the channel know that I'm a bit of a bass head, so it'd be no surprise that I slightly prefer the way that the XMC-2 does bass over the Anthem. I always felt that the AVM70 was maybe slightly subdued in the bass department, but at the same time maybe slightly cleaner. Of course, bass is always something that you can adjust to your flavor, but as a stock sound, I would say that the XMC-2 has a little bit better bass presentation. But of course, after adjusting to your tastes, I would say that all things would be equal here. The same thing can be said about the high end here. I would say that the AVM70 is ever so slightly brighter than the XMC-2, and I do prefer the stock sound of the XMC-2, but again, once adjusted, all things would be equal here. So from my experience, I would say that the XMC-2 does handle movies just ever so slightly better than the AVM70, simply because the brighter effects are just a little bit tamer, and there is a little bit more powerful bass, or just a little bit more bass. But the AVM70, I would say, would lean a little bit more towards music, simply because the bass, like I said, is just slightly more subdued, if not just a little bit cleaner, with these, I wouldn't say lifted highs, but at the same time, they are just a little bit brighter, which I find does work better for music. So I would say XMC-2 a little bit better for movies, AVM70 a little bit better for music. Another reason I do prefer the AVM70 for music is because there's a setting on there called the Anthem Logic for Music, or Anthem Logic Music, and it just kind of boosts the bass just a little bit, and it does utilize a little bit of the surround speakers just to make the soundstage feel even broader or even bigger than it already was, and I found that I really do enjoy this for music. But if you are looking at this from a strictly sound quality perspective, and sound quality is the only thing that matters, and even though the difference may be minimal, but still noticeable when compared side by side, I do have to say that the XMC-2 does slightly edge out the AVM70. Alright guys, we're going to get to the sound demo comparisons in just a second here, but there you have it. Emotiva does edge out a win on the sound quality department, so it's not all bad. This thing could be a true beast if they got it running better, at least from the experience I had. Alright, so we've all been patient enough. I know I made you guys wait for these sound demo comparisons. So with these comparisons, I will have the subwoofers on for both music and surround sound. I will not be using ARC when doing the Anthem portion of it, and I will obviously not be using Dirac in the Emotiva portion of it, but I do have all the distances set, and I do have all of the levels set, and what I did is I ran a sound wave to see how loud it would be, so I've actually level matched the volume on the processors themselves, so neither one should be louder or quieter than the other. So even though I did try to match the SPLs of the volume of the two units. I did find that the Emotiva still sounded slightly louder, so you may hear that in the demo videos as well, but I did hear it in my room, it did sound slightly louder. So when I was doing these demos for the music, I had both units in the same sound modes, 2-channel, and then when I was doing it for the surrounds, I was using Dolby for both. And as usual, with every demo I do, there's a quick disclaimer here, and that is that my sound equipment, my room, as well as the device that you are listening on, will affect the sound, so don't take it as an accurate depiction of what I was hearing in my room. The Anthem demos will be lit in red lighting, and the Emotiva demos will be lit in blue lighting. So let's get to this first demo, and it's one of my favorites. It's the bar fight scene in John Wick. With this sound demo, it was actually difficult to hear the differences. I did notice two, and one of them was that, again, the bass was just ever so slightly heavier with the XMC-2, as well as with the ricochets. I did find that they sounded just a little bit clearer with the XMC-2 versus the AVM70. This next demo is a Dolby Atmos demo, and it's called Spherical. Alright, so in this demo, again, it was difficult to hear the differences. Like I've been pointing out, the differences are slight, but again, I did feel like the bass was just a little bit heavier with the XMC-2. Alright, so moving on to the third demo, this is the race scene from Ready Player One. This demo in particular, I did notice that the Emotiva did sound louder. Like I stated earlier, I did try to volume match them with my U mic and Rue. So they were volume matched, but I'm not sure why the Emotiva did sound louder here. The other thing I noticed again is that the bass was just a little bit more with the Emotiva. The Anthem, although a little bit subdued, maybe a little cleaner, but again, the Emotiva does offer more of the bass. All right, let's switch to 2-channel and music. Again, I do have the subwoofers enabled here. The first demo is called Background Blues. Alright, so with this demo, I did feel that the Anthem was slightly more balanced with the music. Not that the Emotiva, I would say, was unbalanced, but just that the Anthem sounded slightly better with the music here. But let's try another song here. This one's called Gentleman by J2X and Lou.
It's like you play a game. The end won't be fake. No, like you shine. You said you needed space, but sober heart, drinking like a moment.
Alright, so again, I did slightly prefer the AVM70 here. Similar to the XMC-2 over the AVM70 with movies, I do slightly prefer the XMC-2. With music, I do slightly prefer the AVM70, but the differences are minimal. This next demo is a pop instrumental called Done by Matthew May. Both of these units did a stellar job here, but again, I do slightly lean towards the AVM70 for this song as well. I'm really curious to know what you guys think between the two units and these sound demos, so make sure to drop your thoughts down below in the comment section. Okay, so we've come to the point in the video where I need to tell you guys which processor I prefer overall. So the Anthem is a very well-rounded processor, which did come out of the gate with some bugs, but Anthem was very quick to exterminate them. It has a top-tier sound with most, if not all of the connectivity you could ever hope for, wrapped up in a good-looking package with a room correction software that demands respect. On the other hand, we have the Emotiva, which also comes in a stellar-looking exterior, but with some bugs that are so far tough enough to withstand the test of time. It comes with the room correction software that is arguably the best. Unfortunately, I can't vouch for that because of the aforementioned bugs. And the user interface and functionality does beg a cold hard look from the engineers. One thing that you can't argue is that the XMC-2 does sound fantastic, and like I said, even slightly better for movies than the AVM70. It does have a lot of potential, but at the moment it does fall short of greatness. I don't mean any offense to those that love Emotiva, and I understand the appeal, and I'm sure that there are those of you that have had a smoother experience with it than I have. So for me personally, I am going to be sticking with the Anthem AVM70. I think it's pretty clear at this point. It still has fantastic sound, a top-tier room correction software, and it's just a smoother running, more functional unit from my experience. With all that said, guys, I would love to be proven wrong. I don't like saying negative things about products, but I do have to be entirely honest with you guys. So Emotiva, if you feel that it was the unit itself, or you feel that it was unjust in any way, I would encourage you to send me a unit that would operate to a higher standard, and in the hopes that it would prove me wrong about the product. Alright guys, I would really appreciate if you'd help me get to 10,000 subscribers, so please tick the subscribe button, hit the bell icon if you do, and please take just 1 second out of your day to hit that like button. I truly do appreciate it. Remember to enjoy your systems. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.